everyone. I'm Angie Gray, and on behalf of myself and fellow panelists and friends, welcome. What we're likely agree on today is that what we've done in the past isn't working. The way we thought we should do things is why we're experiencing our current challenges. The accepted status quo of the past isn't accepted anymore. Albert Einstein said, "We can't solve problems from the level of thinking we had when we created them." The five of us agree and think you might too. We believe it's time to think differently. It's time to modernize our management. One really important key to doing that is to raise our awareness around trauma, to understand at a deeper level what's happening not only in the lives of our employees, but ourselves. We've invited you to join us today to talk about how we can modernize management through a trauma-informed care approach and why that's so important to our success in senior living now and for our future. What we're sharing today may not be brand new to everyone, but we trust as leaders you come with a learner's mind, curious and open. We believe you are the perfect leaders to be in this time, in this industry, serving the people you serve. Our intention is to support you in your leadership, to inspire growth, collaboration, and service at an even higher level. We're honored to have you here with us today. We will have Q&A at the end, so be sure to type your questions in the chat as we go for each panelist. Today is brought to you by Radical Sabbatical, Jean Hartnett, Senior Virtual Health, Aspire for More with Erin Thompson, Bella Grows is Laura Munoz, Memory Lane Foundation is Joanna LaFleur, and High Performance Nursing is me, Angie Gray. We're sponsored by Trestle Hospitality Concepts and Think Tank, James Lee, and Nicole Will. For those of you interested in those continuing education hours, you'll receive a certificate via email after the final attendance is submitted. So here's our learning objectives for today. First, we want to learn 3 reasons why it's important to be trauma aware. Next, we'll learn how trauma awareness heightens our emotional intelligence. We'll learn how to create a psychologically safe environment. We'll learn how to support employees during traumatic events. And lastly, we'll learn how to build trusting environments for healing and for belonging. It is my great honor to introduce to you the reason we're all here, experts dedicated to trauma-informed care and adverse childhood experiences.
So much, Angie, and a warm welcome to all of the participants. My name is Jean Hartnett, and my pronouns are she, her, hers. I started in the senior living profession in 1989 as a certified nursing assistant. This early experience really inspired me to stay in the profession, and eventually I became an executive in nursing home environments, assisted living communities, and memory care communities. My most recent tour of duty was that of a family caregiver. When my mom had a stroke and my dad was suffering with kidney disease, I moved home back into the basement and cared for both of them up until they passed away just a couple of years ago, just a couple of months apart. I've seen senior living from a lot of different perspectives, but one of the perspectives that unites all levels of care and all employees throughout your organization is the topic of trauma. So that's the perspective me and my esteemed colleagues are going to talk about today. Managing and leading through a trauma-informed lens with a lot of emotional intelligence and psychological safety. The topic of trauma is deep. That is why our approach today is simply about raising awareness. When you raise awareness, you're asking people to get curious about a topic. When you learn, and what you will learn in this discussion is that nearly everyone you encounter likely has experienced trauma, including those of us on the panel today. Eventually, I will be receiving care in the facilities that most of you manage and lead. And I need all of you to understand my unique history with trauma in order for you to take care of me appropriately. As it stands now, most of our assisted living communities and nursing homes are not trauma-informed. So up until the time that I sign that admissions paperwork and I take my seat at the bingo table, it is my mission to ensure that our nursing homes and assisted livings become trauma-informed. We want to be sure that all of you on this call see us modeling good trauma-informed care practices. So I begin this conversation with the emergency and non-emergency numbers for your reference and guide. You would be amazed at what you forget when your body is in a stress response activation, such as when you're talking about the topic of trauma. For your reference, we have these numbers here in case you need them throughout this presentation or after. By this point, you're probably wondering yourself, what is trauma? The American Psychological Association and Gabor Mate define trauma this way. The American Psychological Association says that trauma is an emotional response to a terrible event. Gabor Mate, in his writings and his teaching, reminds us that the word trauma is a Greek word for wound. This trauma physician says that trauma is a psychic wound that hardens you psychologically and then interferes with your ability to grow and develop. So if trauma is an emotional response to a terrible event, then the COVID-19 pandemic is an example of trauma. And I'm guessing many of you didn't even think about trauma prior to the pandemic. But that singular event put a laser focus on trauma for all of us. The pandemic and its challenges brought to us isn't the only reason to be trauma aware. I'm going to present to you 3 reasons why I believe it's important to have trauma awareness in your management toolkit. The first reason is that it's regulatorily required. Right now, in our skilled nursing facilities, the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services is requiring you as leaders and managers to be trauma informed. What that means is that it's your duty to make sure that you're recognizing the signs and symptoms of trauma in your residents and doing everything that you can to mitigate against trauma. This federal regulation is relatively new in the senior living community and was part of the requirements of participation skilled nursing facilities had to implement about 5 years ago. The regulation reads like this. The facility must ensure that residents who are trauma survivors receive culturally competent, trauma-informed care in accordance with professional standards of practice and accounting for residents' experiences and preferences in order to eliminate or mitigate triggers that may cause re-traumatization of the resident. If you were like me, you had no idea what the spirit of that regulation meant. I know that when I was a nursing home administrator, it was really important for me to understand the context of a regulation in order to implement it in my nursing home. With that in mind, I called 3 nurse consultants at the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services and asked them why this was now a requirement in nursing homes. And they told me, ladies and gentlemen, that up to 90% of older adults that we care for have likely experienced a traumatic event. They went on to tell me that about 85% of the people that we care for have death by suicide as the second highest rate of death in our nursing homes. To me, those were shocking statistics. So with this data, I began thinking about the context in which we deliver care in our nursing homes. And I thought about our ethos, first do no harm, which has its root in the Hippocratic Oath. And I thought to myself, how can we ensure we're not doing any harm to individuals we care for when we don't have a clear picture of their life experience? I then thought about the people that I had cared for when I was a certified nursing assistant and later as administrator. And I thought about the people that likely have experienced trauma, individuals that were Holocaust survivors or veterans of war. But I also thought to myself, what about the other people that we care for? How are we going to ensure that we are not re-traumatizing them by the care that we provide them? This thinking came full circle when I recalled those individuals that I cared for towards the end of their life. You remember being a part of a care team and watching as an individual is in the throes of death or near dying, and how difficult it was to pinpoint the pain that they were exhibiting from a treatment perspective. All of us on the care team had really great intentions and saw that physical pain likely as having a physical etiology. But now that I'm trauma aware, I have to think to myself, was that pain that individuals were exhibiting actually physical pain? Or was it emotional pain that our seniors are working out towards their end of life? And I can continue to think about that thought. And I continue to think to myself, my goodness, why is it that we say rest in peace? And what I came up with is that I think we say rest in peace because so few do. So, what is it that we can do to become trauma aware so that we can allow for the older adults in our life to truly rest in peace? The second reason it's important to be trauma informed is that it's critical for workplace culture. Dr. Sandra Bloom is a board certified psychiatrist who works to create trauma aware workplaces. And she says it best when she says that trauma aware workplaces offer a sanctuary of safety and support, a place where people can bring their whole selves and be valued for who they are. Now, when I read that quote, I literally am transported back to 1989 when I was a 19-year-old certified nursing assistant. What my nurse manager saw of me was that I was a smart, energetic caregiver who picked up shifts without complaint, often worked doubles well into the night and into the morning, and I was emerging as a leader on my 3 to 11 shift. And my manager wasn't wrong about that. That's who Jean was on the outside. But on the inside, I was really battling with a lot of emotional pain. And that emotional pain was caused by an unplanned pregnancy that ended in a closed adoption. I kept this important fact hidden from everybody that I worked with, and I numbed the pain with workaholism and people pleasing. I poured all that I had into the people I cared for, as that was my way to numb the pain. Many of your employees are doing exactly the same things that I did back in 1989, but for different reasons. Your team members are in extreme pain right now, and you may not be able to see it because, like me, we are masters at holding our hurts inside of us. But let's take a look at what the data is telling us right now about our workforce. 7 out of 10 of our workers indicate that the pandemic was the most stressful event in their career. 88% of our workers regularly report experiencing moderate to extreme stress, are more distracted, and have higher rates of illness, which, in fact, impacts productivity. The Gallup organization tells us that employees with fair to poor mental health have 4 times more unplanned absences than individuals that don't have poor mental health. The underlying current to all of this is traumatic stress. Traumatic stress can lead to the overproduction of cortisol and can in turn cause inflammation, weakening our immune systems and increasing the risk for physical illness. Trauma can really take a physical, mental, and emotional toll on our employees on a daily basis, and they just don't get to check that baggage at the door. The final reason to be trauma-informed is that it humanizes us. Research has shown that traumatic experiences are associated with both behavioral health and chronic physical health condition, especially those traumatic events that occur during childhood. Substance use, mental health conditions, and other risky behaviors have been linked with traumatic experiences. So the research I'm referring to is what's known as the Adverse Childhood Experiences Study. This research raised awareness that there is a direct link between the trauma that occurred to us as children to poor health outcomes as we age. In 1998, Kaiser Permanente and the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention tracked the health outcomes of 17,300 adults. And they found that there are certain categories of adversity that occur in us as children that have a direct impact to poor health outcomes. Like all great research, this study was based on a hunch. One of the main investigators in the Adverse Childhood Experiences study was studying obesity in about 500 individuals. And he found that individuals who were rapidly losing weight and having wild success on his protocol were also dropping out of the study before it ended. Curious about this outcome, this physician by the name of Dr. Folletti conducted follow-up interviews with those individuals that were leaving the study. And he found that many of the female participants that were dropping out had child sexual assault in their history and in their background. And they felt if they kept on the excess weight through obesity, they would ward off sexual advances from people they didn't want to encounter with them. The 10 categories that Dr. Fileti discovered wasn't only just child sexual assault that happens for children that has poor outcomes, but also these 9 other categories. He looked at child sexual abuse, child emotional abuse, child physical abuse, emotional neglect, having a mentally ill or depressed or suicidal person in your home, having a drug addicted or alcohol family member in your home, witnessing domestic violence against your mother, a loss of a parent to divorce, and finally having an incarcerated family member that belongs to your family group. What the ACEs study found is that there's a direct link between childhood trauma and the adult onset of chronic disease, as well as mental illness, social and economic problems. About 2/3 of the participants experienced one or more types of adverse childhood experiences, suggesting that ACEs or adversity just don't happen by themselves. The physicians also found that there is a dose-dependent health outcome with ACEs, meaning the more ACEs a person has, the higher risk they are for mental, medical, social, and economic problems as an adult. Compared to people who have an ACE score of 0, people with an ACE score of 4 or more are 10 times more likely to use injectable drugs, 7 times more likely to be alcoholic, 3 times more likely to engage in risky sexual behavior, 3 times more likely to binge drink, 2 times more likely to be a current smoker, 30 times more likely to attempt suicide, 5 times more likely to suffer from depression, and 11 times more likely to be diagnosed with dementia. Small wonder then that Dr. Robert Block, who is the former president of the American Academy of Pediatrics, said that adverse childhood experiences are the single greatest unaddressed public health threat facing our nation today. Imagine how different our world would be if our healthcare system addressed adverse childhood experiences. Do you believe, as I do, that instead of having a sick care system, we would actually have a healthcare system? Most of you listening today can just about imagine if your employees were to take the ACEs assessment. In management and leadership and everyday life, trauma awareness shifts the focus from what's wrong with you to what happened to you. A trauma-aware approach acknowledges that healthcare organizations and care teams need to have a complete picture of a person's life to provide effective support with a healing orientation. Now, I'm not suggesting that all of you become your employees' therapists, but what I am suggesting is that you don't have to be a therapist in order to be therapeutic and provide for therapeutic environments for your employees. Another way to say it is that trauma is bad for business. It impacts all aspects of employee health and patient outcomes. Adopting trauma-aware practices can improve patient outcomes, treatment adherence, and health outcomes, as well as provide for staff wellness. It can also reduce avoidable healthcare costs and in both the healthcare system and the social services sectors. So what's to come next with trauma awareness? My company, Radical Sabbatical, was created to help organizations rethink their relationship to their employees and get those impacted by trauma on a path to healing. Senior living is in a unique position to make workplaces engines for mental health and well-being. Doing so will require organizations to rethink how they protect workers from harm, foster a sense of connection among workers, and make space for their lives outside of work. In short, I'm advocating that our senior living communities bring more community into them. I'm not suggesting that any of this is going to be easy, but it is going to be worth it. A healthy workforce is a foundation for thriving organizations and a healthy community. Radical Sabbatical and the senior tech company called CARE have recently partnered to survey 50,000 nurses and frontline workers on the ACEs questions, social determinant of health questions, and how COVID has impacted their physical and mental health. Preliminary data tells us that trauma is having a moment in senior living, as we received over 1,000 individuals from the CARE platform completing the survey. And of those 1,000 participants, over 900 of them have recommended and asked to receive my trauma healing workbook. The trauma healing workbook is an interactive workbook that helps employees understand trauma and moves them from trauma research to a trauma me-search and gets them on a path to healing. As I conclude my part of the presentation, I want to leave you with the mantra that I have adopted in doing this work, and this work can be difficult. And I'm asking if you would adopt this for me too. I have really discovered and learned about trauma that it's cyclical in nature, and that is a vicious cycle, meaning trauma can be passed down from generation to generation. In order to eradicate trauma, we have to break that cycle. So the mantra that I developed goes something like this. How do you stop child abuse? You stop elder abuse. How do you stop elder abuse? You stop child abuse, and so on. As I yield my time and turn the spotlight over to Erin Thompson, I'm placing you in really capable hands as Erin starts to make the link between trauma and emotional intelligence.
Thank you, Jean. I'm Erin Thompson, and I have over 20 years experience inside the senior living industry. And my passion is to guide senior living leaders to become growth-oriented rather than goal-oriented. I believe that it is important to be able to talk about all of our success and empowering moments, and yet still talk about all of our embarrassing moments so we can empower others as well. What I know now is becoming trauma aware and self-aware allows us to focus on the growth of our team, but more importantly, our own personal development. I am a servant leader. We work in a service-based industry, and it is important to understand what valuing all people mean. When people are sick, we will do our best to heal them. If people have something broken, we will help them fix it. But if we value people, we will serve them. John Maxwell says this a lot in many different ways. And what I take from that is that we value our residents. We value their families. And we value the prospects that we want to move into our community. We serve them. What if we valued our associates the same way? As Jean Hartnett has discussed in numerous conversations, what if we took a case management approach to our frontline teams, the way that we do for our patients or our residents? What if we had a resource list that was available to help us give to an associate in need? What if we stopped assuming the worst and allowed our associates the grace and understanding that they need when tough times come their way? Through awareness, we can give our associates the guidance they need to make appropriate long-term and financial decisions. Trust me, I know how hard the 7th flat tire is in a week. But if we prepared for these events in a way that allowed grace, if we manage from a trauma awareness lens, and we know that 90% of people have had at least one traumatic experience in their life, we can begin to understand that growth and development may not have happened along a continuum that we would expect. We could take the approach of educating people on proper car maintenance, decision-making, and long-term thought processes. There could be solutions that we can find to have these incidents, flat tires, happen less frequently. I don't have all the answers yet, but I believe together we can create a way that serves the members of our team in a very holistic way. When we have awareness of how trauma can affect people, we can begin to react very differently because we extend grace rather than judgment. We can recognize reactions may be symptoms of trauma, and we can respond with a keen awareness and resist re-traumatizing by not responding in kind, but with dignity and respect. By saying, "You are safe and valued here," when we become aware and understand how our responses can value or devalue people, that is how we can serve our residents and our associates. Unregulated people cannot regulate other people. Trauma is described as damage to the psyche that occurs after a severely difficult or painful event. Individuals may exhibit emotional, physical, and psychological side effects as a result of their traumatic experience. Let's talk about COVID and being the trauma that we can all unite around. The fear, the resistance, the boldness that we had to take to operate in the unknown. Watching people we care about suffer and die and wonder if we're going to have the same fate. Trauma-informed care is a framework that involves the understanding of all types of trauma and their side effects in order to incorporate that knowledge into their practice. The term trauma-informed care or management, it sounds so intimidating and overwhelming. But what we have to understand is that trauma-informed care is a framework. What is a framework? A framework is a system of rules that are used to govern a process or decisions. It's a guide that allows us to understand that we're trying to accomplish. Your community or your company's core values is a framework of how you will operate. Trauma-informed care is a very simple framework that focuses on trust and transparency, community and collaboration, empathetic relationship, empowerment, humility, and responsiveness. Based on this perspective, it's not intimidating at all. It is an intentional and thoughtful way to manage or care for your residents and/or team. How do you recognize trauma? Here's a whole list here of how you can recognize trauma. But when people exhibit the signs and symptoms of trauma, their stress response is activated. When this happens, one of four things can occur. They either fight, they either flight, they freeze, or they fawn. If you look at the slide with symptoms of trauma, emotions like anxiety, worthlessness, hypervigilance, irritability, headaches, numbing, addictions, emotional overwhelm, mistrust, shame, depression. A lot of these can also be given the title of being angry, but the odds are they are not angry. If drilled down, they are most likely an emotion from one of these emotions on this list. Can you look at this list and pick a few symptoms that you may have incorrectly defined as anger in yourself or someone else? I know I can. If you have ever been on the giving or receiving end of any of these stress responses, it is not an enjoyable experience. But we know now our response doesn't have to mirror theirs. This response is not about you. And if you know your own triggers, you can protect yourself from reacting in a negative way because you know this is a person who is hurting rather than a person who is hurting you. When you watch people overreact to situations, ask yourself if they could possibly be in a fight, flight, freeze, or fawn moment. Let me give you a real life example. I was an executive director of a community with 110 associates. About 85 to 90 of them were requesting me for a while to come off of a 4-on, 2-off shift rotation and to get on an every other weekend rotation. That decision required a lot of bandwidth for me to make happen. And for a while, I put it off until one day I decided to devote time and attention to investigate if I could make this work. I was without a few key managers and I was responsible for a bulk of the schedules. After a few weeks of extra hours, a lot of detailed OT overtime analysis, because we were switching from 8-hour shifts to 12-hour shifts, and ensuring not too many associates were working too many days in a row through the transition, and 45 days in advance of any set schedule to change, I passed out a rough draft to open up a dialogue of feedback. I was proud of the end result, but I was completely exhausted in every definition of the word. I knew this was the answer, and all of my hard work was going to pay off, and everyone was going to be happy, and I was finally able to give them what they wanted, which was every other weekend off. I walked down a particular hallway to discuss openly with a group of associates. I had worked for a long time. I have worked with them for a long time, so I was sure that they were going to be happy. Big smile on my face. I'm ready to answer all the questions and bask in my accomplishments. Then I saw that someone wasn't happy, and I felt the fire start burning inside of me. This associate was angry. She was slamming her right fist into her left hand. The look on her face was anger and disgust. Immediately, I felt my defensive wall of protection started rising. Her main complaint, and what she was most angry about, was I scheduled her to work on her son's birthday. She started a very disrespectful tone of accusations about how I didn't care about anyone here. She wasn't going to work on her son's birthday, and all the other things that you could imagine. What did I do? I reacted in kind. I was so angry that after all my hard work, attention to detail, and not to mention my history of ensuring that everyone got the PTO day that they wanted off, that she would throw such hurtful words around. And I let her know exactly how I felt about her words, and it was not my finest moment. So let's go over what was really the issue here. What I knew was I was making everyone happy. What she and everyone else knew is that I was working on this schedule to create the possibility of every other weekend off. What someone might know is I didn't look at any PTO requests. I was creating a working rotation for everyone. I was highly anxious, overworked, and trying to wear many hats. What you really didn't know is that I was struggling with feeling like I had to be perfect, needing validation that I am doing a good job because I felt like a failure and I needed to be significant to people. I needed the dopamine hit of being the hero. What I never knew until now is the story that I told myself for the majority of my life, "You will never be enough," is what she triggered with her response. Nothing I ever did was ever going to be enough. And I felt as if my worth was being attacked. For her, I can only assume that the schedule triggered her worthiness symptoms as well, because she assumed, even though there was no evidence to support it, that I didn't value her because I didn't give her the time off. The fact is, she had not even submitted the time off request. It was an irrational response from her that quickly escalated by my unprofessional response back to her. When we understand overreactions can be communications or signals and not always an attack on someone else's character or management style, it helps us understand that someone's overreaction to a situation is a signal that there may be more going on that meets the eye. It's a cry for help that could allow a leader to say, "Are you okay? What is really going on here? You are a valued member of this team, and when you are hurting, we want to support you in healthy ways." Had I been more self-aware and self-regulated, and not exhausted and running on fumes, too tired and highly anxious, I would have been able to understand this and not think that response was about me. Leadership is about leading your team and modeling positive patterns of communication and actions. And becoming trauma aware is a form of emotional intelligence that allows you to discern when someone is projecting their pain on you versus being angry with you or holding you accountable. So what is emotional intelligence? Emotional intelligence is the ability to manage both your own emotions and understand the emotions of people around you. When we understand emotional intelligence, we begin to understand that we don't see things as we don't see things as they are, we see things as we are. That is why some of the key components of emotional intelligence are self-awareness, self-regulation, motivation, empathy, and social skills. Truth is, as far back as we can remember as a human race, we survived and earned our living with physical labor. Then we evolved to valuing an education, and intellectual labor became the norm. And what we're seeing today is a new shift. Now it's the ability to use our emotional intelligence to lead a team to success that is in high demand. Loving and valuing people precedes leading people. The quote that we have all heard, "They don't care how much until they know how much you care." Leading inside the senior living industry must begin with the heart. Our team needs to see our heart, our desire to serve, and our consistency in serving will motivate our teams to react in kind. Leaders need to excel in listening, observing, and serving. It's hard to be proficient in all of those skills if you are placing your focus on tasks and being overextended. Strengths of leaders with high emotional intelligence are problem solving, their ability to create teams, to get things done, to create influence, awareness, and to excel in communication. But the best aspect of emotional intelligence is the understanding that being a leader is not about you. It's always about the people we serve, the vision we cast, and the success that we achieve together as a team. When you are an emotionally intelligent leader, you understand that you have to make yourself more valuable. It's important to build a firm foundation in your strengths, your values, and your identity. You know that in order to add value to others, you must value yourself. Leadership is a visual sport. So when we lead our teams to be growth-oriented rather than goal-oriented, we gain success both internally and extrinsically. Your teams can have consistency and success if a good leader can keep the motivation on an intrinsic level rather than an extrinsic level. The intrinsic motivation of growth never stops like achieving a goal will. Why emotional intelligence is so important for success is because your strategy to achieve any goal is only as good as your ability to communicate it. Clarity becomes extremely important, and it is the main ingredient in emotional intelligent leadership. A great team becomes great because they are clear on their mission, their roles, and their value to the team. Weaknesses of leaders with low emotional intelligence are poor communicators, uninspiring, tend to micromanage, create stress, lack of vision, and lack of self-control. We avoid vulnerability like the plague. We blame, we pretend things don't matter, and we become perfectionists to hide the turmoil. This style of management likely creates a very unsafe work environment that will give way to those unhealthy stress responses of fight, freeze, or fawn. And the negative responses to those reactions will only add fuel to the fire, potentially re-traumatizing, and people will be devalued and toxicity will prevail. A lack of clear communication can breed resentment and anger, and then it becomes a vicious cycle. So how do we change? Trauma awareness starts with you. You cannot manage others' triggers without knowing your own triggers. And a modernized management approach means going deep inside yourself and exploring your own personal trauma. Because when you become self-aware and self-regulated, your values, and you can align your actions with them. Your confidence becomes rooted in an authenticity, which allows you to be more open to feedback, perspective from other people, and react to tough situations logically and respectfully. You are willing to step out of your comfort zone and lead with courage, embracing uncertainty and imperfections as a natural part of the leadership journey. You are capable of creating a culture where individuals feel valued, supported, and connected. And you continue the healing in the areas that trauma may have prevented the growth and maturity from occurring. I ask you these questions. What if we started using emotional intelligence in the same way that we use in business intelligence? What if leaning into the discomfort of vulnerability changes everything? What if we went from being a knower and being right to being a learner and getting it right? Creating a psychologically safe environment will be the result, and Laura Munoz will be guiding us on how to create that in our communities and business.
Thank you, Erin. Hi, I'm Laura Munoz, and I am the Executive Director at Bella Groves, a dementia care community near San Antonio, Texas. I'm going to talk to you about how to use emotional intelligence and the trauma awareness we are going through today to create a psychologically safe workplace for you and your teams. I'm pretty new to the senior living industry, but what I am not new to is psychologically unsafe workplaces. As a former high school teacher, I worked tirelessly to create a psychologically safe environment for my students and was really successful in doing so. However, especially in my last few years as an educator, there was little to no emotional safety in my workplace. The leaders in my organization consistently spoke about creating emotional safety for our students, but not once in 9 years do I recall a conversation surrounding emotional health for the staff, emotional intelligence in general, or using trauma awareness in any capacity to foster psychological safety. Today at Bella Groves, we work diligently as a team to foster a deep connection with our leadership team and caregiving staff, creating and sustaining a psychologically safe work environment for your staff that they will feel psychologically safe in. If, like Erin stated, we add emotional intelligence to business intelligence and truly modernize our management practice, what we get out of that is psychological safety. This means creating the type of workplace where we foster open communication. An employee can make a mistake, admit it, and know that their job will, depending on the severity, of course, still be there afterwards. When they are feeling uncomfortable about a situation with a team member, they know that they have safety with their leaders to have a conversation surrounding the issue and will undoubtedly learn something about themselves and their team member. When you are a trauma-informed and emotionally intelligent leader, you recognize the impact of trauma on individuals, and with open communication, foster a culture of empathy and sensitivity. This gives employees a safe place to express themselves and allows the leaders to understand the diverse emotions within a team, respond with encouragement, and lead the employees to growth in their own emotional intelligence. As Jean mentioned, it is extremely likely that we will never know the full extent of the trauma our team workers faced in their past. The true capacity of what our caregivers and frontline workers have experienced in their lives, or what their ACEs score may be. However, we do know that there is a direct correlation between adverse childhood experiences and social problems. The key factor here is the social connection. How can we manage people if we don't have an understanding of how their social experiences have taught them to react through trauma? If no one has ever taught you how to play football, can you run out on the field and be the quarterback? Absolutely not. You need a coach, a team, and guidance and support to grow and become the quarterback. It doesn't matter where people come from or what their upbringing was like. They need support, guidance, and coaching to grow. Adverse childhood experiences can significantly impact a person's ability to manage others and be managed by others. Let me say that again. ACEs can significantly impact a person's ability to manage others and be managed by others. Individuals who have experienced ACEs may carry lasting effects, such as heightened stress responses, difficulties with trust, and challenges in interpersonal relationships. Recognizing these potential impacts is crucial for leaders to foster a supportive work environment. So, considering this, I want you to think about your current staff and team. How do you think they have been managed by others? But how do we do it? Fasten your seatbelts. We as leaders have all been able to do so much that feels inherent to us, but these skills are not like that. This process is indeed a skill that must be worked on. It is not a natural ability, and it must be nurtured in order to be effective. Here are a few steps that you can take to develop your community or organization to be a psychologically safe workplace. First, promote open communication. This will help foster an environment where employees feel comfortable expressing their thoughts and concerns. You can also encourage your team to practice active listening and empathetic communication to understand and validate others' perspectives. Second, build trust through transparency. Be transparent about decisions that directly affect your team and organizational goals. Establish trust by communicating openly and honestly. This will help reduce uncertainty and build a foundation of credibility within your team. Next, demonstrate empathy. Understand and acknowledge the emotions of others, showing genuine concern for their well-being. Create a culture where empathy is valued and individuals feel supported in both personal and professional aspects. And lastly, encourage a growth mindset. Promote a culture where learning and improvement are celebrated. Emphasize that mistakes are opportunities for growth and reduce that fear of failure, which can help foster a positive, resilient mindset. By incorporating these elements of emotional intelligence into your leadership style and organizational culture, you can contribute to the development of a psychologically safe workplace where employees feel valued, understood, and motivated to contribute their best efforts. Here are some other tangible things that you might already be doing and can use the mindset shift to help nurture a psychologically safe environment. Number 1, stop calling your employees family. Not everyone has healthy family relationships, And that one word could be a huge trigger for someone who doesn't have a good or traditional family experience. Stop calling direct care workers on their days off to pick up shifts. Unless someone has given you explicit, please call me if you have a need directions, don't call. Don't take calls on your days off. This is probably a very difficult idea for some of us. I know it gives me a little bit of the gasps. However, when you model what is acceptable to your employees, you are showing them that you honor your time off and that you honor theirs as well. Granted, there can always be exceptions to the rules, but use your judgment. Some things you can start doing. Role modeling self-care and positive well-being practices. We give mental health days for our employees, all employees at Bella Groves. We, the leaders, model this for our staff and let them know when we are taking mental health days. If we don't model it, they won't believe it's acceptable for them to use it for that purpose. I also like to share with my team what I do on my mental health days so they know I'm genuinely caring for myself. Understand your management philosophies. Reflect on your own core values, beliefs, and approaches to leadership. When you are tuned into yourself and how you lead your team, that is the first step to emotional intelligence growth. Self-awareness, which leads to self-regulation, social awareness, and relationship management. Often people will stop after the awareness part. Yes, I know I cut people off in conversation, but I'm working on it. Yet, they never seem to get better at it. Self-awareness is useless if you're not going to work towards regulating yourself and understanding that it is the issue plus your response to the issue that decides whether or not the outcome is positive or negative. Next, review your hiring processes. Are you sending a message that employees should fit in rather than belong? When you interview your candidates, are you considering the shift they are applying for and how they will fit into the team that already exists? Are you asking the right questions to find out if you are the right fit for them, as well as them being the right fit for your organization? I challenge you to work directly with your frontline workers and know what they value about the team they currently work with so that you can correctly assess your candidates' abilities to meet those requirements for a solid culture fit. Ask employees what their values are, how those values appear in their lives, and what you can do to uphold those values for them at work. This creates a connection to the person they truly are and how you can support them at your organization. For example, if one of your employees really values personalization and care, then you can uphold this value by encouraging staff to build close relationships with the residents and then share the knowledge they gain with their teammates. This is how you develop a culture where residents' unique needs, preferences, background, etc., are all well known to each member of the team. What is the result? Your staff is connected to the residents, to the team, and to the organization. When you ask your employee questions like this, what you are modeling for them is open communication and the development or continuation of supportive policies. They feel seen and heard. And when a person feels supported in their workplace by their leaders in this capacity, we see less turnover, more success with conflict resolution, and a strong team culture. Ask your employees what type of boundaries they keep. Ask them how to honor those boundaries. This final connection for people with ACEs, and really employees in general, is because boundaries at work are crucial. They help employees maintain their well-being, prevent burnout, encourage a healthy work-life balance, and improve mental health. Empowerment is not always being right. It is having the courage to show up and know that the outcome of a difficult situation is 100% how you handle your response to it. I teach this to our team at Bella Groves when I have an opportunity to coach a caregiver or a member of the leadership team. This is a huge wake-up call for a lot of people because it is empowering. It is so empowering to know that you and you alone are responsible for how you react to anything that comes your way. What you choose to do with the situation prompts self-reflection and an awareness of how your actions contribute to the failure or success of the outcome. It allows you to accept responsibility for your response, and instead of feeling helpless in challenging situations, you can proactively adjust your approach and seek solutions and alternatives to what your normal response may have been. It takes a lot of time and a lot of effort to get good at it, but it is so worth it. When you fervently believe in an approach like this, you are empowering yourself and your team. As a leader in the senior living industry, it is imperative that we understand where our residents may have come from and where our caregivers' past experiences may be as well. When you consider that unregulated people cannot regulate others, you will understand that it is vital to the success of your leadership skills that you connect your emotional intelligence through a trauma awareness lens. When you are trauma aware, you will understand triggers. We had a caregiver at Bella Groves who felt safe and supported enough with our leadership team to share that she had been in a physically abusive relationship in her past. We also had a resident at that time whose behavioral expressions were a trigger for her due to that past. With that knowledge, we worked through some ways in which she could feel safe and still be able to do her job. We connected with her entire shift in a way that provided support for her so that she was not afraid to do her job. That is psychological safety. Recognizing coping mechanisms. This will direct you to a larger issue and not only the symptom of the problem. If a staff member is disrespectful and unkind to a manager when asked when they will return to work after being sick, ask the right questions when you sit down to visit with them. And think about yourself and your own natural reactions. How often do you act out when you're irritated or upset? When people are not actively working on their own emotional intelligence and growth, it is difficult to recognize their behaviors and how they connect to how they feel on the inside. That is not their fault. 3, tailor your leadership approach. How many of you have children? Do you treat them all the same? Of course not. You tailor the way in which you parent based on that particular child. I have a 10-year-old who is very sensitive and empathetic. I certainly don't yell at him when he makes a mistake, unless it's life or death, because what would that do to him? Upset him, and then what? Is he going to learn? He learns, but what he learns is that when he messes up, he better not tell mom or she's going to scream at him. So eventually he'll stop telling me when he makes a mistake. Think about this with your staff. If you approach Jane and John the same way, are you going to be successful? Probably not. Learn your staff, know what makes them unique, and tailor your approach so you are able to better meet their needs. We have gone over so many reasons why this is crucial to your success and leadership growth. Here are some practical reasons to implement what you have learned today. Resident well-being. Traumatic past experiences can significantly impact the emotional and physical well-being of residents. Being trauma aware will help you teach your staff how to connect on a deeper level with the residents. Employee morale and retention. Traumatic events can impact the mental health and morale of a caregiving staff. A negative workplace culture may contribute to higher turnover rates, making it challenging to maintain a consistent and skilled workforce in your community. Ethical and moral responsibility. Leaders in the senior living industry have an ethical and moral responsibility to ensure the well-being of their residents and staff members. Prioritizing a safe and supportive environment aligns with the fundamental values of care for older adults. And finally, innovation and continuous improvement. Acknowledging and addressing traumatic experiences leans into a commitment to continuous improvement. Like we stated at the very beginning, if we don't change, things won't change. What we have been doing in our industry has not been as successful as we would like for it to be. The only way this can improve is if leaders encourage a culture of learning, innovation, and adaptability to enhance the quality of care. In summary, addressing traumatic experiences in senior care is not only a moral imperative, but it is also essential for ensuring the health, safety, and satisfaction of residents and sustaining the long-term success of a positive workforce. The effects of trauma are evident in senior living communities every single day, and my colleague Joanna is going to talk us through an example of that and how she used a psychologically safe workplace to help her team through it.
Thank you so much, Laura. I've been working in senior living for about 20 years. During that time, I started a home care company and owned 3 memory care homes. And during that time, I walked my staff and families through many of our residents' end of life. That's when I realized the invaluable need to support our team through these difficult and sometimes traumatic events. I describe senior care as being brutal because it's absolutely the most beautiful thing I've ever done and experienced, but also at times the most brutal. Our caregivers have one of the most difficult jobs out there. It's difficult in so many ways, but the biggest is that you care for people who become your family, even though you know that one day you're going to lose them. And I believe that's one of the most courageous things that you can do in the world. Caregivers aren't just giving care. They are giving pieces of their heart away at the same time. So when it comes to losing our residents, we absolutely have to show up for them. In this picture, you'll find Dawn. Dawn came to us at 85 pounds. She had Down syndrome and dementia and had just recently been hospitalized for losing 20 pounds in a month in her previous facility. It was heartbreaking to see how small she had gotten, but I knew we could help. When I was asked to take her even for a short time, I said, absolutely. All I want to do is help make her life better. And better it was. She immediately loved the activities that we had, and the staff made her involved in every single thing. We learned how to get her to eat food by telling her that her mom made the food and brought it here for her. And boy, was her mom a good cook. My staff also made up clean plate awards, and we learned that positive reinforcement worked super well for her. The creative things my staff came up with to do for activities such as hiding and scaring people, one of her favorite things to do when I would come in the morning and jump out and scare me, word game contests, watching babies on TV, her birthday parties that we threw, including this one in the picture, which her sign around her waist, it says 56 and fabulous she was. We gave her a lot of jobs to do because she loved helping others. She would fold laundry, set the table, and we even bought her a mini vacuum that she could vacuum up after meals. She immediately started gaining weight, laughing more, and smiling. According to her brother, we had not only brought her back to health, but put joy back in her life. While Dom was with us, her dad moved in as well, as he had Alzheimer's type dementia. You could see them in the mornings laughing, dancing, and you could see their bond being such a beautiful thing. We had to walk Dawn through losing both her dad and her mom while living with us at Memory Lane. And I thought, how is Dawn going to survive this? I saw her on days when she was anxious and sad, and I watched my caregivers take her for special outings, make silly faces, and even make her part of the team. I watched my staff and their love help heal her. One of my favorite stories about Dawn is that she loved helping so much that she wanted to be part of our team and she wanted to be an employee of Memory Lane. So what we did was we gave her one of our uniform shirts and a name badge, and we called her our special helper. 1 month, my staff had the idea to make her Employee of the Month, and I have never seen anyone so happy and proud. In fact, she took her certificate and she went into the room where her dad had lived and passed away, and she said, "Dad, I made it. I'm Employee of the Month." It was precious to watch. At the end of her life, she ended up in the hospital with pneumonia and was having a very difficult time. We visited her in the hospital and brought some of her favorite things. And I asked the hospital if she could please be brought home so she could live her last days and hours with her family. So they sent her home. It absolutely broke all of our hearts to see where she was. But my team and I were there for her through it all and for her last and final breath. I'll never forget 7 of my staff coming in on their days off to take turns sitting with Dawn and comforting each other. I spent her last 2 days in that room with my staff, holding Dawn, holding my staff, offering love, and singing her favorite songs to her to bring her comfort until she finally left us. Watching her struggle at the end of her life was heartbreaking, but she was there, surrounded by the ones who loved and cared for her in the most difficult and the most beautiful moments of her life. Maya Angelou says that I've learned that people will forget what you said, they'll forget what you did, but they'll never forget how you make them feel. It's important that our words match our actions as leaders. If we say that we care, but we abandon our staff in their time of need, we create an environment that is not psychologically safe. So here are a few practical ways to support them. First one is be there. There is nothing more important than showing up and being fully present in the moments at the end of your person's life when your staff are hurting. I remember having lists of things to do during that time period, and sometimes having to run down and even do payroll, but running back up and making sure that my priority was my team. Another thing that's important is explaining what's to come. Your staff needs education and they need clear expectations of what's going to happen. It's important to explain what is normal in the dying process and what should alarm them. It is very scary to care for someone who is dying, no matter how many times you've done it. It's a very hard thing to do. Hospice can help with this, and there are also written materials that they have to explain the death and dying process. Next is to be vulnerable. Death is sad and scary. In fact, as sharing that story with Dawn, it still brings tears to my eyes. I cried at almost every single death of every resident we ever had because they truly were family to me. And I think because I was able to share my emotions, it also gave permission for my staff to do the same. We also need to be curious and ask better questions. We need to realize that not everyone grieves the same. We talk to our staff about what will help them grieve, and we can't assume that it's the same way we do. I like to ask the question, how can I best support you through this? And really listen to the answer. Once you lose a resident, it's important to celebrate their life. It's important to do a remembrance ceremony or some way to help your staff say goodbye and grieve. At Memory Lane, we did this with a balloon ceremony where we would get a balloon for each and every caregiver, give them a Sharpie to allow them to write a message to the person who had passed away, and then did a balloon release outside Memory Lane while we sat together, cried, and shared memories. It was absolutely one of the most beautiful experiences I've seen. A lot of times, our staff are expected just to pick up and move on, even after they've experienced death. So it's important to say their name. It's important to share stories. We continued to share the silly, fun, and emotional stories about Dawn, and it helped us to remember and grieve her. You make it normal to talk about so they will feel comfortable enough to do the same. Offer resources. We had a full-time social worker at Memory Lane, and they would help walk our staff through grief and make one-on-one appointments with them. This was an amazing resource, but also hospice has social workers that can help give your staff resources to grieve. There are also nonprofits focused on grief support. Whatever you do, offer 1-2 resources to your staff and encourage them and help them utilize it. Last and not least, it's important to give them time to grieve. Make sure you give them time alone at the bedside at end of life so that they can say their goodbyes in peace and to help them grieve. Often people may need mental health days or some time off after experiencing death. Sometimes they may need an extra break or even to leave early, and we need to be very sensitive of their needs and try to meet them. Next up is relationship expert and nurse leadership coach, Angie Gray.
Thanks, Joanna. Thank you for sharing your experience and thank you for sharing your heart. I'd like to share a quick story from my perspective coming from a nursing background in senior living. I started my career as a nurse and practiced for about 10 years. While I was working, like many of your employees, I had my own unknown trauma and the trauma I was experiencing in real time at home and at work. At home, we had 3 little children. I delivered my 4th, and he was born with hypertension of the newborn. He almost died and was flown to a hospital about 2 hours away from us. He spent 3 months in the NICU and came home on oxygen. I worked second and third shifts so that my husband and I could tag team caring for the kids. At work, I was emotionally and physically sick. I was full of anxiety from the bullying and the negativity from my peers and the management. The patient load was overwhelming, and I had recurring nightmares for many years, actually, that I couldn't get to my patients and that I'd miss their meds. And unfortunately, I was sexually harassed twice by my nurse manager, who was never fired, and I had to continue to work with him. No one knew what I was going through. At the time, I finally quit. I didn't want to leave, but I had to leave for my survival. I left because of the toxic environment. I didn't feel like I belonged or that anyone really cared. I certainly was not the only one experiencing challenges like that then, and there certainly are less hurting people today. The truth is that at that stage in my life, I wasn't practicing self-awareness. I wasn't equipped with the communication and relationship skills of EI that definitely would have helped me manage my own emotions and I was certainly not aware of my hidden trauma triggers. And what I do know now is my leaders weren't trained in how to lead successfully. They didn't have the skills or the resources to facilitate a culture that made me feel safe or that I belonged. They likely had their own conscious or unconscious trauma, and they also had lives they were trying to balance. If the leaders in my organization had been trained in trauma informed care or emotional intelligence, they may have gone to me and asked me why I was calling in for a low census every opportunity I had. I likely would have felt like Laura shared, psychologically safe enough to go to them and talk to them about my experiences. If I would have been trained myself in those relationship and communication skills, maybe I would have trusted myself more. That was 25 years ago. And unfortunately, not enough has changed. Over the last 5 years, I've had the honor to confidentially interview over 100 nurses and nurse leaders, and all of them have experienced some form of trauma. And unfortunately, very few shared they feel psychologically safe or have a sense of belonging in their work environment. The five of us that you're hearing from today chose this topic because we believe we can do better and we must do better for ourselves, the ones we lead and serve, and for senior living and the senior living industry. What's next? We heard Jean share ACEs. She shared 3 reasons why it's important to be trauma aware. We heard Erin share how trauma awareness heightens emotional intelligence. Laura shared how to create a psychologically safe environment. And Joanna shared 6 ways to support your employees during traumatic events. We all shared personal stories. A recent ANA report stated that lack of support from leadership is a major factor contributing to the chronic stress and burnout of nurses and a primary reason why they're leaving and thinking about leaving. There is an urgency in our industry, and we all feel it. Awareness is the first step, but as all the panelists have emphasized, awareness alone is not enough. What can we do to be better and do better and serve at the highest level? It takes practice. If we've done our job and you see the urgency in modernizing the way we manage through the lens of trauma-informed care, to facilitate that, we must build a foundation, and the foundation is trust. Trust is everything. We're either building trust or we're not building trust. And it's not enough to actually just be a trustworthy person. We have to build a trustworthy environment. Trust is the foundation that everything else builds on. Without trust, everything falls short of its full potential. And by the way, the lack of trust is your biggest expense. Trusted environments are the container, if you will, that facilitates healing, psychological safety, and a sense of belonging and growth in every area of your organization. So there's several seeds of trust, as I call them, that are important values to strengthen when we're creating a trusted environment. A couple of them stand out when we're talking about trauma specifically, and one of them is consistency, and the other is connection. Today, I'm sharing 3 best practices that, according to research from the Trust Edge Institute, will help create a foundation for trust by strengthening consistency and connection. If you're already doing these things, that's amazing. Definitely keep doing them. It takes 10,000 hours to master a skill. So the first one is one-on-one meetings. One-on-one meetings create opportunity for connection through psychological safety, and it demonstrates a desire to genuinely know the person. An example might be to set a goal to sit down for lunch with each of your leaders or team members once every 3 months, which also demonstrates consistency. It takes time, but watch as skepticism, suspicion, second guessing, whining, and complaining lessens, and satisfaction and productivity improve by leaps and bounds because you're establishing that connection and building trust. The second one is be a little bit more vulnerable. If you don't continually reinforce trust in any relationship, personal or professional, it erodes and it disappears. As leaders, we tend to hide our mistakes and failings because we think that if people see them, they'll respect us less and trust us less, and it feels scary. In fact, the opposite is true. The more open and honest you are about your own mistakes, the more people are willing to trust you and give you the benefit of the doubt. Research shows that 92% of employees would trust their senior leaders more if they were more transparent about their mistakes. According to research from an article on Asana, in leadership, vulnerability is when you show your emotions to your team and your coworkers. This doesn't mean you have to have big, showy expressions. Instead, vulnerable leaders are more like a quiet observer. They're in touch with the emotional pulse of the space they're in. Erin Thompson shared earlier, this is emotional intelligence. For example, you could show vulnerability by assigning a team member who wants more responsibility to a work task you've also managed. Brene Brown says vulnerability is not weakness, but rather our most accurate measurement of courage. And who doesn't love Brene Brown? Her research has shown that leaders who are willing to be vulnerable are more likely to build trusting relationships, encourage innovation, and foster a culture of creativity and growth. Showing vulnerability strengthens the trust seed of connection. Practice it, and it strengthens consistency. So the third one is emphasize magnetic traits and eliminate repellent traits. This is a repeated one, but it's worth saying again. Some behaviors automatically draw people to us, while others we avoid. One of the most magnetic people I know is my very best friend, Rashonda Young. If you don't know who she is, find her on LinkedIn. She's amazing. She's actually an introvert. She's a great listener, and others are super drawn to her. She sees the best in others. She rarely complains. She asks engaging questions, and she focuses on others and not herself. She is a great leader in our community, and she's one of my best friends and trusted leaders. So, for example, if your relationships and communication, if you're expressing a sense of gratitude and appreciation, people will be drawn to you. You'll build trust and connection. Being a good listener versus being the one talking all the time, seeing the positive versus complaining, encouraging versus being critical, being respectful versus sarcastic, and vulnerable versus always needing to show strength. Lastly, for the best outcomes and anything that we've talked about, all of this information, for the best outcomes, we have to train our attitudinal muscles. What does that mean? We need to be willing to think differently. Jean and Erin and Laura and Joanna and myself have presented many reasons to think differently about how we've seen ourselves and how we see others and how we've led our organizations. How we think about ourselves and others, every relationship and situation will be the cause. Everything else is the effect. I want to say that just one more time. How we think about ourselves and others, every relationship and situation will be the cause. Everything else, the effect. The way we choose to think is our greatest power. As our thoughts rise, the world rises. Senior living needs to reinvent itself, to do what we haven't yet done. Not only to invest and prioritize marvelous technology and marvelous systems, but to prioritize developing marvelous people, including ourselves. Our good intentions aren't enough to forge meaningful, lasting change, but our willingness is everything. Willingness to provide ongoing learning opportunities that focus on trauma-informed care, enhancing emotional intelligence, and fostering a trusted environment. This is how we modernize management in senior living. We hope you guys feel supported today and ready to join us on this transformative journey. This concludes this part of our webinar. We're really grateful that you're here. And on behalf of my friends and fellow panelists, Jean Hartnett, Erin Thompson, Laura Munoz, Joanna LaFleur, and myself, thank you so much for your time. It's been our pleasure and our honor to learn and grow with you. Next up, we want to, before we go to a little bit of a Q&A, there is this resource that we've created for you, not myself, actually Laura Munoz, who did a great job. It's a document with a list of resources that we feel would be helpful for you and your team. We'll also be emailing that to all of you. Also, the one last thing before we do any Q&A, if you have any questions, if you're interested in upcoming work that the five of us will be doing, make sure that you put that in the chat. Just say yes, please, in the chat, and we'll be sure to email that to you as well, what some of our upcoming things are. And that concludes our webinar for today. Erin, do we have any questions?
Not at the moment. If there are questions, you can put them in the chat or in the Q&A box. But we appreciate your time. And here is our document that Laura.
We'll stay on for a couple of minutes if that's okay with you guys. The time we have until 11:30. So if you have questions or comments, put them in there. If not, you are free to go. And we're so grateful that you came.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for your time today.
Anne said that the chat is disabled, but in the Q&A section, you can ask a question. I think you can text in that part. If you have a question, please feel free to ask there.
Oh, okay. I see it. I can't seem to get it. Oh, wait. Oh, I guess it was chat is disabled. Gotcha.
It's a great resource, Laura.
Thanks. Try my hardest.
Jean, this may be for you. Is there a way to become certified in trauma awareness?
Yes, there is actually. There are a number of different trauma certificates that people can utilize. The one I recommend, the one I've been looking at, is through the Trauma Research Foundation. The author of The Body Keeps the Score, Bessel van der Kolk, runs or basically sponsors the education from the Trauma Research Foundation. I encourage individuals to look at that certification. I also want to point people to an organization called PACES Connection. So PACES, PACES, PACES Connection. They offer a free certification program via webinar if individuals are interested in that. And just a note on that organization, the reason why it's called PACES is that they know that ACEs is not destiny. Meaning there's so much that we can do as individuals and on ourselves and within our communities to heal from trauma. And what PACES teaches us is that many of us have survived our adverse childhood experiences because we've had someone who offered protective and compensatory experiences. That's what PACES stands for. So I encourage individuals to look at those two routes, the Trauma Research Foundation as well as PACES Connection.
I have a really good question. This one is really good because I've struggled with it myself at times. It says, I'm working on emotional intelligence and I have difficulty in how to approach and talk to coworkers without it seeming like I am criticizing their work. That is a great question. I will start, and then, of course, everybody has had their own experience with this, I'm sure. I always knew that when I was going to have a conversation that I needed to make sure my anxiety was down. Because when my anxiety is up, I can come off being very direct, and too direct is too harsh. So I think advice that I had taken in the past and that I have learned now is for me to write down or to text out somewhere what I want to say. And so it's already done. And so now I can come with the second or the third version to the person that I need to talk to. Also, always start the conversation with, you know how much I care about you. You are a valued team member here. You are important to this team, and your role here is very important, and I value it. I want to talk about something that is affecting the team or a resident or their family. And from my perspective, if you do those two things together, then it helps. But always know, what I now know is that when my anxiety is high, my approach is too harsh. So just take a moment, breathe, write things down, and then come at it with the second or the third version.
I was going to say, whenever I talk to someone about a problem, I like to look at it about as me and the person against the problem, not me against the person. So that's really been helpful for me. And I also plan ahead and practice ahead before I talk with someone as well. That's great advice.
There's just a lot. There's a lot of science behind it. It's a great question. It already, you can tell if you weren't working on your AI, you wouldn't be asking this question, Michelle. So it's awesome. What Erin said is great. Joanna said is great too. And I would say that, like Jean shared with us in the beginning, when we have a frustration, it's always something to always be introspective first. So you feel that trigger, that's a trigger. That's actually a gift for us, I believe. It's a gift for us to go, okay, hey, that's upsetting me. Instead of pointing the finger outward, we point the finger inward and say, what is that triggering within me? Is the story that I'm telling myself actually true? It may be totally true, but you want to go through those questions, just to self check first. And then, like with what Erin said, and then a really practical approach that there's a lot of science behind, there's an actual process. And that's probably something that we'll do together in the future, the five of us. But to say to your person, let's say you're going to talk to Laura. So you would set an appointment with Laura and you would say, Laura, I have a frustration that I'm feeling, and I'd like to share it with you. Is there a good time that I can talk to you about it? So you're being vulnerable, so you're emulating leadership. And then if when Laura says, then you want to make sure that you honor that. So now that also gives Laura the opportunity to take ownership that yes, she's willing to engage in this conversation with you. And then from there, you do what Erin was saying too. You just go and you start with an appreciation, always starting with an appreciation. I appreciate the way, whatever. And then thank you for giving me the time. And then you share your frustration, always speaking from I sentences. And then, you know what? She may or may not have good EI skills to give back to you, Michelle. That'd be the other thing, to go in without an expectation, but just, or no agenda, just to show up as your best self. And that's the best you can do. And then you'll take the next best step from there.
I would also say patterns of that particular employee. I think if you've had a consistent conversation with them and what their reaction responses are, plan for that.
Yeah.
I can think of constant conversations that I've had, knowing what the response would be. Play that in your mind too. Don't be too shocked if it gets emotional again. But then also figure out, is it the fight, flight, fawn, or freeze? And then she's not trying to hurt me. She's just, or he's just hurting. And so it takes some of that pressure off of you.
One of the things I want to add to this rich discussion is I think we think of conversations as having a beginning and an end, meaning I've got to have this difficult conversation with this employee. I have one chance and one chance only to do it right. But let's reframe that and just really recognizing that developing a relationship is an ongoing conversation. And so you have more times than just that one time to make it right and go back and course correct if you feel like what you were expressing and what you were communicating didn't land as it should have or what your intentions wanted it to.
Great point, Jean. Are we at our time, guys? It's 12:30 Central Time. Do you have
We
another
have one
question?
more question.
You have
sorry.
another question.
Yes. Laura, would you like to read it?
Oh, of course. So is there an ACEs questionnaire or assessment we can utilize for our teams? And let's see, what would be the best way to initially engage a team on this topic while acknowledging the very vulnerable nature of the subject, trauma ACEs? Oh, Jean.
Okay, yes.
Yes.
So
Oh, Jean.
Oh, Jean.
the ACEs questionnaire is actually part of the resource kit that Laura put together for us. So you'll have the 10 questions that constitutes the ACEs assessment. Now, one of the things I like to tell people is that this is an assessment. This isn't a questionnaire. This isn't a survey. This is actually an assessment that's typically done in a clinical environment. But like we said before, you don't have to be a therapist in order to be therapeutic. I think what you need to do in order to really prepare your employees that you might be presenting the ACEs questionnaire is, first of all, make it optional. You want to be able to let people opt into something like this because they're basically opting into some vulnerability. And I think another piece to do is to really start with an overall awareness of what ACEs is, that this isn't about finding out what happened to you that seems very private. It's about creating a team environment in which we can support each other through our adversities. And so I think just setting the stage. I'll finally put a plug in for the 5 of us. Hey, we'll come to your campus. We'll talk about ACEs with you and adverse childhood experiences and how to heal from those things from all of our different perspectives.
Great question, James. Okay, if that's it, are we ready to close up, ladies?
Yes. Thank you,
Awesome.
everyone, for your time today. We certainly appreciate it.
Yes, we do.
Absolutely.
Bye,
Thank you so
everyone.
much.
Thank you all.